Good morning, everyone. How you feeling this morning? Yeah, I like that little enthusiasm over here on the left. Good stuff. There is a good reason to be enthusiastic, and that is we are in part 2 of our Holy Discontent series. And if you remember last week, we talked about Nehemiah, and we started to learn some great stuff about exactly how we can determine whether we have a holy discontent or not. So I want to give you a little recap here, first of all. Little recap. So if you remember last week, we learned that Nehemiah, he was in his cushy castle, right? He was in his comfy little job security position where he was working for the most powerful man on the planet, King Artaxerxes. Exactly. I'm glad you all knew that. And he was working for King Artaxerxes, and he was the cupbearer. He had a great position, and he was there in a lot of comfortability and security in a lot of ways. But then he heard some very disconcerting news. Do you remember what it was? He heard a report back from his homeland that the temple was built and fine, but the walls that surrounded Jerusalem were not repaired, were not in existence. And that disturbed him so greatly because he realized that his people could worship God in this temple, but they had no protection. They were completely vulnerable. It would be as if you went to bed at night and not only did you not lock your doors, you had no doors to lock. So just no doors in your house and you just go to sleep. So that disturbed him greatly, and he wanted to do something about that. And he realized that he had not just a discontent, and we'll talk a little bit at some point later about the difference between a discontent and a holy discontent, but he had a holy discontent. And here's one way we could define a holy discontent. When you feel called to passionately engage for God because a brokenness troubles you greatly. So there was a brokenness that was disturbing him, that got put in his heart, and that was disturbing him greatly. But sometimes we run into roadblocks, don't we? You ever have a project before that you want to start, but you don't know where to start because you feel like you're running into different blocks, every which way? In fact, a lot of us, if we're honest with ourselves, when we have really hard work, what do we tend to do? We avoid it, right? It's at that moment that mowing the lawn becomes so important. Or suddenly, that room you hadn't cleaned in a long time becomes sparkling. Or your desk is totally squared away. Well, with Nehemiah, he didn't know what to do exactly. He didn't know what to do because he didn't have the ability to just, command resources to go fix the wall. The wall hadn't been built in 90 years since the first wave had gone back. So that tells you something right there. If it hadn't been built in 90 years, then obviously there's a reason why. And so he didn't have the time, he didn't have the money, he didn't have the resources, what was he going to do? Nehemiah needed help. He needed help. Because he'd been bringing in God. Do you remember how long he had been praying for about this so far? 4 months, exactly. You guys are good. 4 months he'd been praying, and so he'd been bringing God into this. But now he needed some earthly help. He needed someone to help him. Now, I don't know how you guys are about this, but are you guys pretty good at asking for help? Is there any of you guys, raise your hand if you don't like really asking for help. Okay, actually, the majority of us don't. And I don't know if you're watching online, great to have you with us, but a lot of us, it's hard to ask for help, right? But have you ever been in a scenario before where you had to ask for help? You got so humbled that you needed to ask for help. Well, that happened to me, and it actually goes back to the story I shared about last week, if you remember, the procedure. So this is part 2 of the procedure. And some of you guys are getting really nervous. Where's part 2 going to go? But don't worry, we're going to be okay. But what happened was, after, for those of you who weren't here, if you remember, I was in El Salvador, and we had 3 children, and we decided we were done, and my wife encouraged me greatly to have the procedure, and I decided that instead of doing it in the States for a couple thousand, we did it at the public hospital for $40. Great bargain, everything good. So After I had the procedure that day, for the next couple hours, I actually felt really good. I was at home and I thought, wow, this is going great. And in Latin America, we're hardcore over there. And Carla's like, my wife Carla, she said, babe, I got some things to do. Do you think you can go run and pick up the kids? I thought, yeah, why not? Sure. So I went and started driving to pick up the kids. And it was about halfway there to school that I think the pain meds started wearing off. And it was at that point I thought, I may have vastly overestimated my abilities to heal like Wolverine. But I had to keep going at that point. So I kept going, and I started, feeling it more and more and more. And if you know the third world, roads, bumpy. So I was, oh man, this is rough, but I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make it. It's going to be okay. I get to school, I park, and then I have to walk up this hill. And I'm a pretty friendly person, so I make friends with everybody, and I got like all the moms like, hola, Jonathan, and I'm like, hola. I just don't want to talk to anybody at that point. Got the dads like, hey man, what's up? What's new? Oh, nothing. So I finally make it up to pick up the kids, and I'm hurting by that point. I come down the hill. My gait's a little bit altered at that point. And I get to the car, and I look down, and I realize I'm low on gas. And so now I have to go to the gas station. And I'm thinking, better to run out of gas, not to run out of gas. So I better go, but this is going to be rough because at that point, I do not want to get out of the car. So of course, my daughter is 10, I think, at that point, or 9.5 at that point. And so I say, this is how you pump gas. Here's my credit card. Only use it for that and pump the gas. I give her instructions. She's pumping the gas. I send my son in to get some ice and not for soda. And, everything's working out and that's happening. And then they get back in the car, and I am hurting at that point. I just can't wait to get home. Turn the key, click, battery's dead. And I'm thinking to myself, this is not happening. I gotta call Carla. Phone battery, dead. This is not like a preacher story. This really happened, okay? And so I'm sitting there, I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm in a third world country. Where am I going to go? I'm in so much pain. I don't want to get out of the car. And so I did what any of us would do. I sent my 7-year-old son to ask the nicest stranger to jumpstart my car without me helping them. Do you know how weird that is? Like, hey, could you go jumpstart my dad's car? He's just going to stay in the car while you do all the work. That is so weird. But anyways, Joshy did find the nicest guy ever. The guy came over, jump started the car. I think Joshy might have said, hey, my dad had a procedure, so could you help him? And guy came over, jump started the car. We made it home safe, and I still have only 3 children. Life is good. It's awesome. So that's my story. That's a full procedure story. But it was at that point that I needed help, and I couldn't really do anything about it. And that was Nehemiah. That was Nehemiah. Because what he had to do is Nehemiah had to ask the biggest favor of his life. Because he didn't have the power to do it on his own volition. He didn't even know. And some of you guys might feel right now like, man, there's something I would love to do for God, but I don't know how to do it. Well, that's the situation that Nehemiah was in. He didn't know what to do, and he had to ask it from who? The most powerful man on the planet. So let's pick it up here in Nehemiah chapter 2 in verse 1. It says, in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought before him, I took wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before, remember that. So the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. I was very much afraid, remember that too, but I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? The king said to me, what is it you want? Part of the issue why he was sad is because in the king's presence, there's something called mandatory joy. Mandatory joy. Mandatory joy. There you go. All right. Mandatory joy. Why mandatory joy? Because if you're the king, the most powerful man on the planet, back in those times, it was just assumed that you are so great that if anyone comes into your presence, your life is filled with joy. That your face should just light up. Like you're thinking, if you're the king, I'm so great, I'm so awesome, why would anyone be sad in my presence? Anybody here feel like that? Be honest with me now. All right. One honest person in the front row. Thank you. So what was interesting is that Nehemiah, for him to go into the king's presence and be sad, went against what everybody else did. And he was very much afraid because back in those days, it could be off with your head if you displeased the king. And so that was an issue for him. But he decided to be honest because he had something deep on his heart. Let's keep going. Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried so I can rebuild it. This is so interesting that it says, if your servant has found favor in his sight. Because the deal is that his attitude helped open doors. His attitude helped open doors. And he needed God to bless him. But I want to point something out that I thought about when I really started meditating about this passage. What if Nehemiah had been an awful employee? What if Nehemiah had been late to all of his duties? What if Nehemiah had the kind of character that was just so abrasive that it was unpleasant for the king to have him work for him? Where would he be at this moment? You see, I think what's interesting, and you can take it for what it is, but I see a lot of times people who complain about a lot of things, and whose attitudes, a lot of times, they think when they're at church or, them with God, they're different than when they're at work. They can complain at work. They can do different things at work. Or even if they're serving in church sometimes. I see people show up late or just give a half-hearted effort. And you know what it makes me think? I think, you know what? Here's the problem. You can never escape your own character and wherever you go. You can move to a different city. You can get a different job. But guess what? You're still the weak character that you were at the other job. And part of the issue is with Nehemiah is that his attitude helped him to do this great thing for God because he said, if I have found favor in your sight. We have to make a concerted effort to be humble and to realize before God and recognize, you know what? I need to make sure that I'm a great example in all the areas of my life. And it might be being for me, sure, I love help building churches, but God forbid I'm not a great example for my kids. God forbid I don't prioritize my wife. I mean, part of the thing with us is, Carla really wanted me to engage in our personal finances, and I have a lot of other different responsibilities. I thought, this is going to be so hard, but it was so important to her, and I thought, I need to make it important to me because it's important to her. But that's only because I'm like, okay, Father, I need to imitate you in the way that you care for others, in the way that they want to be cared for. I think that's called the platinum rule, right? Not just the golden rule, like loving others the way you want to be loved, but actually loving them the way they actually want to be loved. Anyways, it's a whole other story. I'm taking a tangent. But the fact is that Nehemiah's attitude helped open doors for him. Question yourself and ask yourself, do I give a wholehearted effort in all the areas of my life? Let's keep going. It says, then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, how long will your journey take, and when will you get back? It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of the Trans-Euphrates, so they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah? And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy. And because the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my request. So I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king also had sent army officers and cavalry with me. This was huge. And the thing is, Nehemiah had thought this through. And he thought it through thoroughly. What I really want to point out is that he had been praying, but at the same time he had been praying, he had also been planning. Some of us are really good at jumping to prayer, right? But some of us are good at jumping to planning right away. But are we good at both things? Because planning does make a difference. I mean, look at this image right here and tell me what's wrong with this image. College of Architecture and Planning. They have to put the C on the wall over here? That does not seem like a good example of planning. Or what about this? A tree right in the middle of the walkway. Hopefully no one's texting as they're walking along, right? Or what about this ATM? I mean, who thought this through? This is just poor planning. This is my favorite right here. If you're a construction guy, you know, hopefully there's no kids, when you close the door. These are examples of poor planning. Nehemiah, he had to think this stuff through, and he had to think through big three things because he had this big ask. This big ask that he did involved three things: time off, resources, and protection. Time off, resources, and protection. Let's talk about the time off. Let's go back and let's read in this passage again that we just read and highlight this. Then the king with the queen sitting beside him asked me, "How long will your journey take? And when will you get back?" What if he had not planned anything until that moment, and the king asked him that, and he just stutters, 2 months? I mean, how long would it take to do this whole project and to get back? But he had planned it out. He had thought it through. And so he understood exactly how long it would take. So it says, so I set a time. And he was trying to be realistic about that. Next, the resources. He didn't really have resources. What was it going to take? No one had built this wall in 90 years. And there had been 2 waves of exiles that had gone back before him. Why not? Because people didn't want the wall built, and they probably didn't have the resources to do it. So he's trying to figure out, what can I ask the king? And so let's go back and let's read that. And may I have a letter, Nehemiah asked him, to Asaph, keeper of the royal park, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, by the temple, and for the city wall, and for the residence I will occupy. See, what's interesting is that Asaph ran the king's royal reserves, the whole forest, which was like the best of the best. Any of you guys like wine or anything like that? No one's going to admit it in church, I guess. But, that would be like the finest wine. It was like the finest timber, the finest wood. And he's asking for the king to give him as much as he needed. And it wasn't just for the wall. It was for the gates. It was for the beams. And he shot for the moon. He said, could you also give me some wood to build my private residence with a cedar jacuzzi? Yeah. Oh, yeah, it was nice. It was nice. So Nehemiah was shooting for the moon there. And so he wanted to try to ask, and why was he willing to go out on a limb? I think he was willing to go out on a limb, guys, because it was already deep in his heart. Isn't that what drives us to make the sacrifices sometimes? Maybe today, maybe you've been far from God. Maybe this is your first time, coming out. And you're thinking, God, you've been putting it on my heart, but I'm so busy at work. It's at those moments that when you allow yourself to sit and get in touch with your holy discontent, that it drives you to do and ask the things that you need to ask. I mean, Randy and Rhonda were just talking about our Discover class that comes up where you can kind of go through that, and it helps you to reconnect with God. And maybe if you're watching home online, maybe you felt that disconnect. But when you think it through and you think through what is it going to take, it helps you get the resources. You can ask God and you can ask people around you for help. Also, protection. Last thing, protection. Nehemiah needed protection. Why? Because the journey was going to be long. Let's read the next passage. If it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, so they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. And let's keep going, actually. And because the gracious hand of my God was on me, the king granted my request. So I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry with me. Because the journey was so far. In fact, look how far the journey was. Here's Susa. Can you guys see that? Okay. Here's Susa, and the journey goes all around to Jerusalem. Let's get that highlighted in red if we could. AV team's awesome in the back, aren't they? So here's a little path right there. It's kind of like a Raiders of the Lost Ark, like little dots. And do you know how long that journey was? 3,000? Okay, you have bid too high, madame. Okay. Less than that. $1. Okay, price is right. 900 miles. How long would it take? How long is it from here to your house? Do you want to walk it? Okay, how long is 900 miles? Just think about that across the United States. And imagine going by horse, buggy, chariot, whatever, across that distance. And the roads, if the roads in El Salvador are bumpy, these roads are really bumpy, okay? The issue is that marauders are everywhere. Thieves, vandals, jackals, you name it. They're all there, and you could get ambushed at any time. So imagine how awesome it would have felt for Nehemiah to be going along this journey and to have army and cavalry beside him, escorting him. It would have been amazing. And quite honestly, these other provinces, they were happy to see Jerusalem weak. So they themselves might have ordered some kind of assassination or something. You just don't know. So the fact that he had the letters to all of those governors and the army and cavalry was amazing. So what does that mean for us? I mean, how does that help us? Well, number one, open up and get help. Open up to God. Open up to God with the things that are on your heart. Don't be afraid to share and to talk to God about these things. Because prayer is an opportunity for us to talk and to listen. But also, don't be afraid to open up to people around you. Because usually you're going to need help with the things that you need to do, the projects you want to complete, the holy discontent that's on your heart. You're going to need help from people around you. And the other thing is, don't be afraid to fail. This is kind of one of our mottos here in Jacksonville at the church here. Experiment, fail, learn, repeat. Right? And the reason why this is so great is because it's okay to fail sometimes. It's okay to try something because you don't know how it's going to succeed. If it's going to succeed, you don't know how it's going to turn out. But guys, I'm here to say it's okay. All of 2016, and really 15 for me personally, was adopting this mindset. Getting it in my mind. I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to have things come out perfectly. It's better for me to try something that I believe in and have it fail and learn from it than just not to do it at all out of fear, right? And anyways, like a good friend of mine told me in jiu-jitsu, the mindset is it's not even fail. It's win or learn. Win or learn. Because if you're not winning, then just learn from it. And that's the mindset. And some of us, this would help us in our holy discontent. And just to talk about locally, I want to talk about a couple local heroes of mine right now. One is Poi Tang, Poi, Nate, and Earl. You can clap it up for these guys. And the reason why they inspire me is because we were here late, June and I, a couple nights ago, working on some stuff in the media booth. And I saw these guys in action with something called Boys to Men. And the three of these guys really got it on their heart to help young boys turn into great men. Because there's that quote, it's easier to raise strong boys than repair broken men. And I guess at that point they saw the need there were single moms great single moms, but needed help having their sons have positive role models that could strengthen them. And because of that, they got it on their heart to be able to start something that they didn't know what it would turn into. But it would take kindergarten and elementary school kids, and just on every, Thursday night, I guess, Tuesday and Thursday, that they have sports, they have character building, they have training, they have camaraderie, they do all kinds of fun stuff, but they're there to model both what it means to have a great character, in Christian character, and at the same time have a lot of fun doing it. And when I saw them in action, it was pretty amazing. And I want to say how grateful I am, and I think all of us and the whole community and all the moms, that you guys have had this holy discontent, that you just didn't let it sit there, but you did something with it. So thank you for doing that. Appreciate that. Another local hero of mine is Sandra Shin, who's sitting right over here, who grew up in the islands, okay? But when her childhood, one night when I was on the phone and we were talking about this holy discontent that was on her heart, I didn't realize her story went so deep. Her childhood was very rough, very rough. There was a lot of abuse, and as her words put it, about everything bad imaginable happened to her as a young girl. And it really broke my heart, like hearing the depth of tragedy of what she experienced in her childhood. But her attitude was also incredible, because she said that when she was 11 years old, she found a Bible, and she wasn't even supposed to read it for some reason. I guess her mom didn't want her to read it or something, and or something to that effect. And one day she hid under the bed and she started reading it. And as she read the words, she just felt God's presence and his voice tell her, "You're special." And she said, "I'll never forget that moment." And it changed her whole outlook. And ever since then, despite the abuses, and she said, "Jonathan," she said, "I'm here by the grace of God. God rescued me so many times." But despite the abuses and despite the challenges, the holy discontent that she has is to rescue women from sexual slavery and from violence. And she has started this holy discontent, this endeavor, and she had this women's devotional just a few weeks back to just start rallying people who are interested in that cause to help rescue and pull women out of those situations. And for that, to me, you're a hero, and I thank you for your holy discontent. And lastly, because some of us think, wow, I don't really have like maybe something that's so huge, like a huge thing. And holy discontents can come in many shapes and sizes. But even something that might be considered smaller, but is so important, is my friend Bright, who I mentioned last week, and some of us have had attitudes because he had 5 months paternity leave. You remember that? But that's great, actually, and I think that's how it should be. I'm so glad he works for a company that does that. But in this 5 months, one of the things that he said to me is, he said, "Jonathan, I see that the campus ministry needs help." And I grew up in the campus and graduated the campus, and in this 5 months, I'm going to have extra time. And I want to engage and use my leadership and my help and my support in any way possible to strengthen the campus ministry. And I thought, that is awesome. Because for Jamie, Paul, the elders, all of us who are in leadership, having help like that come in is so important. So important. And And so for the next 5 months, see, now it's public. You have to do it, right? Okay. But for the next 5 months, he's actually already started engaging and helping with the campus. I know the campus is happy about that because he's a fun guy, loves to do all kinds of fun things. But he also loves God, and he's going to infuse that into them. And so, Bray, I thank you for that as well. Thank you so much. How do you know if you have a holy discontent? I think it's important to try to figure out, is something just irk me that I want to complain about? Or is it something that I want to engage into and help? If you have trouble letting it go off of your mind, that may be a holy discontent. It's the kind of thing where if those of us who, are married or engaged, and you have a significant other, you don't want to see that significant other married to somebody else. It means so much. You want to pursue it. That's kind of a holy discontent. A discontent means, I can't believe that George K. Willie picked that song today to sing for Sunday. That's my least favorite worship song. That is just a discontent. Holy discontent is trying to help you out, George. Holy discontent is something deeper. It's something where you feel there's a brokenness that you can engage in. You might not even have all of the resources. You might not have all the time. You might not even have all the protection. But you want to push into it. Today, I would like for you guys to ask you guys to share your holy discontent. Share your holy discontent if you have one. If you don't, that's fine. In fact, some of us, this isn't the season for us to have a holy discontent. And you know what? Nehemiah's project took a lot of people to jump into his holy discontent. So maybe it's you just jumping into a holy discontent that resonates with you. But if you do have a holy discontent, this is the bag of holy discontents. And I would like to ask each and every one of you who feels that you might have one or think that you have one, to go ahead and you should have 4x6 cards. They should be right in front of you in the little chairs or whatever. And go ahead and write down your holy discontent. And there's a white bag up here, and there's a white bag at the back. And you can drop your holy discontent in here or over there. And what we're going to do is we are going to pray over these holy discontents. And then we're also going to, for next week, put them up in the back on a board in the lobby so that the whole community can pray about these things. And we can kind of see what's on our heart. Because it's not just about leadership praying, because we're not holier than anyone else. It's a community rallying together to pray for the things that we can do together. And then next week, I'd probably also like to pick a couple and just share some of the things that you've written. And so I think when we do that, hopefully we can spark some great things that can happen for God and help give each other courage in that way. Next week, we're going to talk about in your holy discontent. We're going to close out the series with overcoming opposition and what happens when you hit opposition and how you can get around that. So that concludes part 2 of a holy discontent. And at this time, we're going to pray for the communion and to think about what the communion means, which is really breaking the bread, which represents Jesus' body, and drinking the juice, which represents his sacrifice, even pouring out his blood. Think about Jesus and his holy discontent, because his holy discontent was us. And being able to help us connect with God or reconnect with God. And if he hadn't have prayed and planned all along the way, we probably wouldn't be here today. So let's thank Jesus for that. Father, thank you so much for this opportunity that we have to be able to come before you, to partner even with you in things that you may have put on our heart, even if they're not direct mandates. We know Nehemiah didn't receive a direct mandate from you, and yet this was such an amazing thing that he wanted to do to give protection to your people. Thank you for every single person, either watching online or here in the room, who has had a holy discontent. I only talked about 3, but there's so many more incredible examples in this room. And Father, I pray that we can encourage each other, strengthen each other, rally together to do great things, to engage in our community and heal the brokenness. And we specifically thank you, Jesus, that you healed our brokenness because of your holy discontent to come down to this earth, to sacrifice for us, and to stay grounded, to not go off on Facebook and complain about how bad everything is, but instead to dig in and to really help heal our hearts. Thank you, Jesus. We thank you for the sacrifice you made, and thank you for being our Lord. And in Jesus' name I pray.